Now, good evening, everyone, and good evening, Nathan. Welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. Tonight, we're joined by the Senior Curator from EPIC, the Immigration Museum, one of our neighbouring museums just across the city from us, Nathan Mannion. Nathan, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thanks, Sarah. Delighted to be here.
I'm delighted to have you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Now, if anyone has questions as we're going through the evening, please do type them in, and I'm sure Nathan will be very happy to answer them as we go along. But Nathan, I've been a big fan of the museum for a long time, so it's great fun to actually have the opportunity to sit down and actually speak with you this evening. And I'm going to just jump in and go straight back to the beginning. So you were around in the early days when EPIC was first being set up. And I'd love you to just bring me back to that time and to give me an idea of where the idea for the museum came about to begin with.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, some ways it feels like it was only yesterday, and other days it feels like it was about 150 years ago. So time has flown. But I guess really the origins of the idea about the museum really came back in 2013, following on from The Gathering, which was quite a popular initiative by Falls Ireland Tourism Ireland to bring those with Irish ancestry, the Irish diaspora around the world, to Ireland in a way to help out during a tough time post-recession, but also to reconnect with the communities in Ireland that they were linked to. I think one of the interesting things about it was very much a grassroots project. There were large events around the country, but you also found people in villages and towns all over Ireland who were doing all of the work in tracing, almost reverse genealogy, and tracing down descendants of people who had left, inviting them back, hosting them, bringing them around, and really making them feel part of the community. And that really was a kind of a light bulb moment, I think, for the Irish state, because they realised there was this real hunger and interest in Ireland's emigration history and where the origins of our diaspora came from, and that there really should be somewhere in Ireland that told that story. They commissioned reports about setting up a national diaspora centre in Ireland as well, but of course money was tight at the time, so the idea didn't necessarily come to fruition. But it did inspire the founder of EPIC, who would be Neville Isdale himself, first generation emigrant from Ireland, from County Down. And he had recently acquired the CHQ building here, where the museum is based, at around the same time. And he felt that while he already had the venue and it was such a potent story and that linked so well to his own story, that he would in fact support it philanthropically and set it up himself. So fast forward to 3 years later, and then in May 2016, the museum opens its doors, which I think was a very impressive feat given the timescale as well. And here we are today.
Very much so. It's quite a turnaround from idea through to opening day. And like Epic or the CHQ, your location, that as a venue in itself has quite a rich history.
Yes, yeah, it's a fascinating building. This year we're just celebrating the 200th anniversary of its construction. Back when it was originally constructed, it would have been a bonded warehouse. So it was used, it's gone on by various names over that time. It's been known as the Tobacco Store, Stack A, the Banqueting Hall, which I'll come back to, and then more recently the CHQ building. Originally, it was set up to store goods that were coming into Ireland from all over the world. The main goods stored in here would have been tobacco, tea, and then downstairs there's a run of 9 vaults, which are still there today and are home to the museum, among other things, that would have stored tea, or would have stored wine and spirits primarily. The original footprint of the building is very much still intact as well. And it had never really been intended to be an event space, although that's something we do quite a lot now, but we're apart from a couple of notable exceptions. So when it opened, there was a champagne breakfast back in 1821, which was sent by the Lord Mayor. It was supposed to be attended by King George himself as well at the time, but he didn't show up. So the Lord Lieutenant had to step in his absence. He was apparently engaged in Meath and couldn't make it. But then the next key event would have been probably in 1856, which was in the wake of the end of the Crimean War. So Irish soldiers that had fought, I think there was a number up to 30,000 Irish soldiers that actually fought in the Crimean War, of which about 7,000 had died. So it was quite a costly conflict. But when they came back, there was little fanfare, even though there was widespread support in Ireland for the war. Whereas in Edinburgh and in London, there had been events to mark their return, celebratory parties, and it was felt that Ireland should host one as well, and that obviously it should be held here in Dublin. The only problem being they didn't have a space large enough to accommodate the numbers of soldiers they were hoping to invite. They looked at places like the Rotunda, the Mansion House, Dublin Castle. They were all too small. They didn't have an indoor footprint big enough. Until somebody stepped forward. It was Henry Scovell, who would have been the owner of Stack A, the CHQ building, which had a 75,000 square foot ground floor plus a mezzanine level as well. So he stepped forward and offered the building for free to host the event, which was the largest indoor space in the country at the time. So luckily, it was able to accommodate 3,000 soldiers on the day, with a further 1,500 people who had paid and donated money toward the event, spectating from the mezzanine level. So you had 4,500 people indoors inside the CHQ building then, which was extraordinary. The place hadn't been fitted out for events, so it was very much a warehouse. So the amount of work that had to go into preparing it was astronomical. They painted all of the pillars inside of the building in blue, white, and red in the colours of the Union Jack. They had banners, furniture brought in, food, spirits, merchants from all over the city donated. One particular one donated a pint of port or sherry for every soldier who attended, and that was just one donation. The 250 hams, 250 legs of lamb. It was enormous amount of food. So it was a huge event. On the day, they marched down the quays. They arrived from all over the country. I think about 1,500 were from Dublin barracks, another 1,000 then from the Curragh, and then another 500 from barracks all over the country. They marched down. They had a parade down to the building. People lined the avenues to watch them come in, and then 1,500 people just came to see them eat and hear the speeches that were given. So it was quite extraordinary.
When you're talking about large events, I was bemused to hear you guys actually broke a Guinness World Record last year.
Yes. So from war heroes to lovelorn hearts, we had an attempt for the world record for the largest speed dating event ever to be held. The previous numbers, there had been a record of 651 participants prior to that. We felt we could beat it, and that in some way we could hold an event inside the CHQ that wouldn't quite rival the Crimean Banquet in scale, but would make a good attempt. And we ended up getting 964 speed daters in on the night, which was an extraordinary amount of people. It was quite interesting in how it was ran. Everybody had to do 20 dates, so everyone was split up into different sections based on age or their own preferences and so on. They had to track their dates in an app, and each date had to last for at least 3 minutes. So it looked like an enormous conveyor belt of people moving around the building. The logistics and the timekeeping on it obviously were immense. It was a magnificent effort by the team here in terms of managing that, coupled with the number of people going back and forth to the bar, cashing tokens. Some people may have slipped away early when they found their true love and wouldn't stay for all 20 dates. But nevertheless, we ended up getting the 964, which is now the new world record. So we're quite pleased with that. And we'll see now how long it takes for someone else to try to break it.
It's a lovely occurrence. And I guess back to kind of talking about Epic proper. So as you mentioned yourself, you opened a number of years ago and you've been on the go and things have been going very well. But how has the initial vision for the museum evolved over time, or has it changed much?
Yeah, no, I would say it absolutely has, because back when we opened in 2016, the initial idea was that if you built it, they would come, and that we'd only have to open the doors and we'd be flooded with visitors from overseas and from across Ireland. That didn't turn out to be the case whatsoever. I think we had about 25% of the people we thought would arrive in the first year that actually did. We realized there was a lot of work that had to be done to build up the museum, to build awareness, to get people to even know where we were, how to get to us, what we were about, to build interest and to get them to come. And that really took up a lot of time early on, because just establishing yourself is very time consuming and resources as well. But since then, we've gone beyond just hoping to welcome visitors into the permanent exhibitions downstairs, and we really kind of built up our profile both online, and we've begun our own cultural programming, which has been growing from strength to strength. We have had a series of different temporary exhibitions that we've started to host. We've built partnerships with different organizations all across the world, working with diaspora groups directly and making them feel at home here. seeing what their needs are and inviting them to come and work with us, from China to Argentina to North America to all over. And for a long time, we had to seek them out and, you know, try to convince them that we were worth having a relationship with. But actually now it's very much the opposite. We receive queries every day from all sorts of people who just want to share their own story with us, or all the way up and they want to work together on a big international research project. So it's really been quite a change. And I guess we've also broadened our remit a little bit. We were very focused on the Irish emigration experience. Now we take a more nuanced view of migration. We see it as a kind of a cyclical phenomena. So we look at people immigrating into Ireland as well, and the experiences of people who lived alongside Irish people all around the world, and what their experiences were, how they interrelated, what their stories are, the similarities, the contrasts. We're very happy about that. I think we've seen huge engagement based off that as well, and it just means the museum becomes more of a welcome site for so many more people.
And I think kind of actually that leads me quite nicely to something that I remember seeing a quote. I think you were saying it's at the front entrance to the museum now. This idea that I left Ireland, but Ireland never left me. And I think this whole sense of pride in your Irish heritage is something that is felt by quite a lot of people, both at home here and the Irish living overseas who've emigrated over years gone by. And I wonder, from your own research, could you speculate what it is about this Irish identity that really cultivates people?
Yeah, well, that particular quote is actually from our founder, Neville Isdale. He led quite an interesting life himself. Having been an emigrant from the age of 10, he grew up in what was then Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, attended university in South Africa, and then went on to work for Coca-Cola, worked his way all the way up to become chairman and CEO of Coke for a number of years. So he had quite an interesting life. He ended up living in 151 different countries, and that quote is one that he felt really encapsulated part of his own career. So he felt that his Irishness, even just his accent, opened doors for him all around the world that mightn't have been possible otherwise. And that he really felt that that kind of global Irish network, the Irish diaspora around the world, was a real strength and a real resource that helped him out himself, and that Irishness is something that there's an immense sense of pride in all over the world, and that even for people who aren't members of the diaspora, Irish people are quite they're considered quite friendly, quite warm, quite open and welcoming, and they like to work with us. So that was where that would have come from. But I think, yeah, there is many different interpretations of Irishness all over the world. Like the Irish diaspora is estimated to number about 70, maybe even as high as 80 million people at the moment, based on the various different census records that we have access to. So it's phenomenal when you look at it as a percentage versus the population of the island today. And yet, so many of those people will engage with Irishness in different ways. So we have a gallery here at the museum, which is called our Celebrations Gallery, which is next to our Connections Gallery. And that's where we take a little bit of a look at how Irish people connect to their Irishness. So sometimes it can be food, it can be different recipes that people are interested in that can evolve as well, that don't necessarily, aren't necessarily popular in Ireland, but have become kind of symbols of Irishness abroad. Obviously, the St. Patrick's Day parades around the world are one of the best cultural activities that Ireland could ever have. And for such a small country, they have a huge impact. And then the kind of celebrations, there's a number of different Irish festivals that take place. So in Milwaukee, in the United States, the largest Irish festival in the world takes place every August, the Milwaukee Irish Fest, which is celebrations of Irish music, Irish culture, Irish arts, and so on. And these are ways that people link. Others link to language. The only Gael talked in the world that's outside of Ireland is in Tamworth in Canada, in Ontario, recognized by the Irish government, the Irish state, as an official Gael talk. They don't have a resident Irish speaking population, but every year people convene there to converse in Irish and celebrate their Irishness. So that's quite special, I think.
That really is quite special. I never knew that. That's quite fascinating. Let's make a detour there if I ever find myself in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one of our guests this evening, Ben, is just looking to reconfirm the name of your founder. It's Neville Isdale, am I right?
Yes. Yeah, so that would be Neville and then Isdell.
Okay. And so I guess kind of one thing that you were touching on there when you were talking about the subject matter that your different galleries explore, could you actually take a step back and tell me a little bit about that? Like during a visit to Epic, you know, what types of stories do I get to be told, and what does my experience entail?
Yeah, so the galleries themselves, so at the minute there are 20 galleries downstairs in Epic, and they're all located in the old vaults of the building. So they're quite atmospheric spaces. They're beautiful, and the brickwork alone is quite impressive. But we decided when Epic was being designed, you know, there's a number of different approaches you could take when trying to fit out a museum, an endless number really. But we, given the subject matter that we were looking at and working with the academic advisors that helped to set up Epic, we could have taken a number of different avenues. So one was, why don't we arrange the galleries by geographic location? So why don't we have a gallery dedicated to the Irish experience in the United States, one to the Irish in Australia, Argentina, and so on. But we decided not to do that. We could have taken a chronological approach and just gone back to the earliest records that we have of Irish immigration and worked our way all the way up to the present day. Which was a strong contender, but we didn't go with that in the end either. What we decided to do was to take a thematic approach to the story. So each of the different galleries focuses on a different subject topic. So we touch on things like storytelling, so the Irish ability to tell a good story. So our playwrights, our writers, our comedians, our actors, and so on. We look at the motivations that people had for leaving as well. So there are 4 overarching themes, and then each gallery then has a sort of a sub-theme. So the first ones are just migration, the means by which people have left. So the Ireland they left behind and the means they've used to leave. So the ships, the planes, how they've traveled around the world. We look at motivation, so the kind of push and pull factors. Why did people decide to leave Ireland? Where did they go? What was happening there that drew them to particular countries at particular times? Under a whole range of different headings. And influence, which is probably one of the largest sections in the museum, which looks at the impact that first generation immigrants and their descendants had in a whole host of different areas, from sports to literature, to art, to music and dance, and what their impact and contributions to the world were. And then today we look at the diaspora today. So how they're connecting back to Ireland, how they established their Irishness, and then how we communicate with them ourselves now and how that's changed over time. So that's the kind of quick overview of the Folks Museum. We touch on things like war, like we have the Irish at War Abroad, so our conflict gallery looks at the wild geese and Irish stories from Irish veterans in different armed forces around the world. We look at Hunger Working Community would be one of the most popular galleries, which looks at the impact of the famine in Ireland. It also looks at chain migration, so Irish communities all over the world, how they would often send money back, and other members of the family or the local area might move, and how that even took place, how it worked. And then employment, which is still the number one reason that Irish people emigrate today, is, you know, either lack of opportunity here, opportunity overseas, or even just some people who have a bit of wanderlust and they want to see more of the world and change career.
That was a question in the back of my mind. I was curious about employment was one I would have assumed, curiosity, but what are the other key motives why people emigrate, and has it changed over time, or is it still, the motivations are still the same?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is one of the still always has been one of the most important factors in terms of immigration. But yeah, they do change over time. Obviously, during the 1840s, during the Great Irish Famine, you know, people were effectively refugees. They were leaving out of necessity rather than a choice that they were making themselves. But you've also find that people, different demographics in different parts of society at different times have left. So one of the galleries we look at actually looks at people who, our State and Society gallery, people who didn't feel part of Irish society or couldn't really express themselves under various different legislations that were in place at the time, both pre and post independence. So obviously the impact of the penal laws meant that people who were either Roman Catholics or even Presbyterians would go abroad where they could express their faith more openly. Members of the LGBT community who up until 1994 were illegal in Ireland, they would have gone abroad as well to places where they felt that they could express their identity a bit more openly as well. We look at the legacy of things like the Magdalen laundries and the mother and baby homes, which obviously are quite tragic part of our history as well, and people looking to leave Ireland for different reasons so that they could, you know, really start to say who they were. Women in particular were often, during the 20th century, were quite unusually, for in European context, women were numerically much more likely to emigrate than men in Ireland, even up to about 75% at one point of Irish immigrants were women. because they often considered themselves to only have about 3 choices. They could get married, they could join a religious order, or they could emigrate. So that's expressed a little bit within the gallery as well, and it's still very unusual. But it's led to strange, different experiences abroad, because often you'd associate kind of employment. You think of Irish immigrants in the 20th century, you think of men working construction in the United Kingdom. Obviously, Irish women contributed immensely to the NHS in Britain as well. Irish nurses made a huge contribution both in the wake of the First World War and even throughout the 20th century. But in North America as well, so lots of different families that would now be Irish American. It would have been the mothers who were the Irish immigrants. So they're often considered kind of the hidden diaspora, because obviously their surnames would have changed and they would have mixed in with different communities in North America. But they're still all very immensely proud of their Irishness. So that's another one that's probably not as well known.
That fascinates me. No, had you have asked me to make an assumption, I would have said quite the opposite, which is in itself kind of, I think the idea of being referred to as the hidden diaspora makes so much sense. And I think that then links into, I remember you were telling me recently about an initiative that you ran. The name, I'm going to get incorrect, but it was something along the lines of the power of a name, which kind of ties into this kind of same concept, in that we kind of, a lot of women marry out of their surnames. Would you tell everyone here a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so this would have been something we began a number of months ago, and it really kind of took off when the museum closed as a result of the current pandemic back in March. So the Power of a Name is an exhibition in the final gallery of the museum at the moment, and it looks at the resonance of the Irish surname abroad. So what an important role it plays in today in how people formulate their identity or their sense of connection to Ireland. You know, often people would leave with very little, but one thing they did take with them was their surname. And even today, many people, many generations removed, that live all over the world, are still very immensely proud of that Irish surname. You can give an entire lecture on how those surnames have been adapted around the world, whether they were miscommunicated on arrival at immigration depots, whether people opted to change them, whether they were translated into different languages, and so on. But we found that lots of people wanted to share their stories of their ancestors who left Ireland. And when they visit the museum, this exhibition gives them a chance to enter in the details of that immigrant who left, their own details as well, and it will tell them, you know, you may be the 15th Farrell to come visit the museum from Argentina, perhaps. And it gives you a little bit more. But while we were closed, it was one of the best things we could do was to make this accessible online. So people could share their family surname and their stories of emigration with us online through our website. And we were able to upload it into the exhibition. So they were able to leave behind part of their own story and their own history and their family history in the museum. And it's permanently featured there. So it's not going anywhere. So you kind of become part of the museum as a result. So we're very proud of it. And it's just been growing in popularity ever since we put it in.
It's a gorgeous initiative. I must go online and get my own name built into it. Not that Costigan is a particularly well-known Irish name, but it's a wonderful thing, and it's a wonderfully creative way of responding to the fact that, you know, yourselves, like ourselves, were closed for quite a number of months with the pandemic that's obviously ongoing. But when you're talking about this whole idea of the Irish who have emigrated over abroad, and you were saying you have one exhibition that looks at the impact of first generation immigrants out of Ireland. Could you tell me a little bit, could you kind of introduce us to a couple of the key figures who have played a role as kind of influential Irish in different industries overseas?
Yeah, I mean, they're endless. So within the museum at the moment, we would have about 330 stories at any one time. The story really is the kind of medium we use at EPIC to tell the broader narrative of Irish immigration. We like to humanize the phenomena. You know, we provide the statistics and we provide the context, but we find that it's really the personal stories that people relate to. That's what they want to hear, and they can often see themselves in the exhibition too. So when people come to us, and like with the Power of a Name and a number of other initiatives we have, they can share their own story, and it maybe end up featured in the museum, because emigration is both historic and contemporary. It's still going on today. It's not going to end at any point in the future. Our diaspora is always changing, and the museum changes alongside that. So within the exhibition, obviously we touch on 20 different themes. There's a whole range of different stories. One that I find people always like, and it's a kind of a quirky "did you know," is that the nanny to the Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, the last emperor of Russia, just up until the end of the First World War, his 4 daughters, the Grand Duchesses of Russia, had an Irish nanny from County Limerick, Margaret Eager, for a number of years. And she was the one responsible for teaching them English while she was over there. And so it's said that they actually spoke English with a Limerick accent. As a result, the royal family in Russia were renowned to speak English with it. They horrified their parents at the time. They had to bring in an expert English tutor from Britain to correct this imperfection in their English. But she went, even when she left Russia after her time there had finished, she stayed in touch. She started corresponding with Olga, Titania, Maria, and her sisters, and they kept the correspondence right up until they sadly died. So that legacy was there. She even published a book about her time there, called 6 Years at the Russian Court, which is freely available online now if you're ever interested in what it was like to be an Irish person in Russia in the early 20th century. So that's a really interesting one that people quite enjoy. I think one of my favorites as well would be Nellie Bly, who I think I mentioned, who wasn't a first generation immigrant. She would have been the granddaughter of an immigrant from Derry, but she led an extraordinary life, even by today's standards. She had been, her father had been a judge, but he had died quite young. She was only about 6 years of age at the time. So the family did struggle financially for quite a while, but didn't stop her. She still went to school. She achieved her education. But what she wanted to do was, she was an excellent writer. Her real name had been Elizabeth Cochrane, but she decided it wasn't fashionable enough. She changed it to Nellie Bly, so that she could become a journalist. She worked in a very brief period with the Pittsburgh Dispatch before moving to New York City, where she really hoped to make her name. And she did. She managed to get a job with the New York World, which at the time was managed and owned by Joseph Pulitzer, who the Pulitzer Prize is named after today. And she walked into his office and convinced him he had to employ her. And it apparently worked. She got the job. But she was renowned for her investigative reporting. He told her that we needed stories that would boost circulation for the paper, something that people really were interested in and wanted to read. And she really took that to heart. She would go undercover to all across the city, into tenements. She'd go into gambling dens. She would expose illegal pawn shop networks that were trading in stolen goods. She'd adopt an alias, all sorts of different things. But one of the ones that she's best remembered for is she faked insanity so that she could be committed to a lunatic asylum on Blackwell Island in New York, which was a women's asylum at the time, having heard that conditions there were atrocious, and she wanted to expose kind of malpractice. So she lodged herself into what was then a kind of a halfway house in the city, stayed up all night so that she would look a little bit more bedraggled, and then met some policemen in the town, in the city, who thought that she was a little bit out of sorts, and brought her to a local doctor, who she managed to convince that she was insane. We were brought before a judge so that she could be committed. That she performed so convincingly that the judge didn't question it at all, and they committed her to the asylum. She went in under the understanding that her editor Joseph would release her after a week, which was quite a trusting position to be in. I think if you're relying on your employer to get you out, something like that, you really want to have a lot of faith in them. But while she was there, she found that the inmates were very poorly attended to. She found that even some of those in rooms next to hers would be screaming in the night for water. They weren't even being given glasses of water, and they were, very dehydrated. Eventually, when she did get out after a week, she wrote it up, and when she published that piece in the New York World, it made her a minor celebrity within the city. She was renowned and rebuilt her reputation, and from there she continued her work as a reporter. But she's probably best remembered not for that, but actually for her attempt to break the fictitious record set by Jules Verne in Around the World in 80 Days, a very popular book at the time. And she wanted to prove that it was not only possible to achieve it, but that she could personally do it and break it. And that would make an amazing story for the paper.
Mm.
They did. And she was able to travel from New York around the world via Europe. She met Jules Verne himself in Paris, who congratulated on her attempt and wished her best of luck. She traveled all the way down through Egypt. She traveled down to Sri Lanka, onto Malaysia, up through China, Japan, and then back across to San Francisco. Little did she know as well that she wasn't the only one trying it. So when word got out about her endeavor, a rival publication, Cosmopolitan magazine, sent their own journalist in the opposite direction to see if they could beat her and steal the scoop, a lady called Elizabeth Bisland. And it was actually ended up being quite a close run thing. One of the instances was that Bisland had been very close to overtaking Nellie when she was in Southampton, but she missed her ship. Some say there was a bit of skullduggery involved and that Pulitzer had bribed the ship to leave early so that she couldn't take the faster boat, but instead had to get a slower ship called the Botania from Queenstown in Cove. Which meant she was 4 days later than she should have been. But Nellie ended up making it back to New York, and in 72 days, which beat the record by a full 8 days. She was celebrated throughout the country. They were actually 2 days behind when she arrived in San Francisco. So Pulitzer basically hired a private train to take her across the country. There was large bottles of champagne given to all the station masters along the route, so they would give them priority through. And she made it back and achieved the record. And very, very fittingly, actually, she was celebrated for her achievement. Bisland ended up being largely forgotten, but it turns out that both of them are actually buried in the same cemetery in the Bronx, not too far from each other. So the two rivals are basically bound together for eternity now. So it's quite the story, really.
She sounds fascinating. She sounds like an amazing character who lived a very varied and accomplished life. It's I'm seeing a couple of comments coming in here just from a number of guests with us this evening who have been in to visit Epic over the last couple of years, just saying how much they've enjoyed the visit. And one person is here commenting that they plan to spend another full day in trying to actually get through everything and to really kind of take in the collection, which is very lovely to see. And there was some very nice words about the little museum as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, they're very welcome. And I think one of the best things about Epic, it's quite digital and quite interactive. The technology we use, we're quite proud of, but it also gives you the opportunity to take as much or as little as you like. So as you move around, you find something that takes your eye in a particular gallery, you can delve in and you can get a little bit of information and a little bit more and a little bit more. Or if you want to pass over something, then you can move on to something you prefer. So you can take as long as you like, as it is. It's mostly self-guided. And we do offer tours as well, but if people don't want to take a guided tour, they're happy to pass through, and they can spend the whole day here if they want. We'd have no problem. And at the minute, we're actually letting people come back. So you can visit once and you get a second free admission now at the moment. So if you want to come and if you want to take a break and head out, you can. Or if you want to do half the museum and come back in a week or a couple of months' time, you have that option as well. So
that's a beautiful idea. It's that's always how I've approached the National Gallery, where I'll go in, enjoy one or two rooms, and then kind of come back again in a couple of weeks' time. So it seems very much like the type of experience that same could be true for Epic, which is a lovely idea and a lovely way to think about it. And the kind of second ticket really incentivizes that. And so actually, you kind of one thing you touched on there, technology and kind of digital presence is a huge part of, or it's kind of at the heart of your visit. Could you tell us a little bit about the thinking and the behind that as a decision?
Yeah, no, of course. So anyone who's been to Epic will be aware that there are quite a number of interactive panels in the museum, lots of AV technology, so audiovisual technology, projections and so on. Every gallery, while the spaces are almost uniform, we decided to design them quite uniquely. So the building, of course, as I said, is about 200 years old. So it's a very historic building, and it's also a protected structure. So the museum, when it was being fitted out, we weren't able to attach anything directly to any of the walls or the floors in the space, which provided some challenges. So each floor you see in the museum is an overlay of the original stone floors, which are still there. There's nodding attached to any of the walls as you pass around. Everything is freestanding or suspended from overhead. So what you see, the sprinkler systems and the heating systems and everything that's above are actually suspended from the original light wells in the building. So there's circular holes in the floors from the original design that would have let light in to the vaults pre-electricity. So a lot of the support stuff is there. And also that we felt that migration was quite a kind of ephemeral sort of history, and that often people took very little with them, so that the opportunity to tell their story, while you could fill the exhibition with letters, you could use, you know, suitcases and keepsakes that people took with them. We didn't have a core collection when the idea came about, and, you know, which, as the little museum will know as well, you have the opportunity to source them, but we decided to take a digital route instead. And what we felt like was that we consider objects to be a kind of a means to tell a story. They have their own story, which can be told really well, but they can also tell the story of the people that owned the particular objects as well, and that's what people are very much interested in. And that by taking a digital approach and focusing in on those stories, we could gather them much more quickly, we could change them much more quickly and amend parts of the exhibition, because we're constantly looking to refresh the content in Epic 2. Because, as we said, we have about 330 stories now. There's 70 million potential stories that we could be including. So we have a lot to draw from whenever we want to update it. And this approach gave us, like, I suppose, the opportunity to do that. And it's also been much more common, particularly in mainland Europe and other parts of the world. This approach is becoming more common as well, and we're seeing other museums adopt it. It's not without its challenges, of course. Like anything that requires electricity or power, it has the opportunity, it has the potential to break. And luckily, we have an on-site tech team who keep everything going at Epic. It actually can be nearly entirely turned on with remote control from off-site. You don't even need to be here sometimes. So that's quite impressive when you see it take place. But yeah, so really we do, of course, have some objects within the exhibition, and the museum does collect objects as well. They just don't necessarily go on display. So some of the interactives you'd see would be showing copies of digitized letters that the museum would hold. But we felt that that was a better approach because original letters can be quite fragile. They require conservation, they require particular care, and they can't be handled in most cases. Some of the ones we feature are from the 18th century, from the 19th century, the 20th century. But we digitize them so that you can interact with them on the screen. You can see the original, which has been scanned and uploaded. There's a transcription available beside it as well. You can move through some of the longer letters, which would have multiple pages. We've highlighted particular passages as well, so you can see the key sentiments that are expressed within them as well. Just something you would never be able to do or permitted to do with original letters. So we thought that was quite a good approach, and also kind of adapting. You can imagine when somebody penned that letter back in the 1780s, they never thought it would be displayed on an interactive screen being read by hundreds of thousands of people every year at a museum in Dublin. So
I always think we in the Little Museum have that experience as well, where it's when you're engaging with someone who is a descendant of someone related to an artifact within your collection, or, as you're saying, the kind of, you know, a family member of the letter writer, and this experience of seeing your loved one represented and kind of present in a museum is quite a unique experience.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had descendants of people featuring the museum come to visit because they've heard that they're here. So while we do have lots of extraordinary people featuring the museum, you know, world leaders, sporting stars and so on, we also have a lot of ordinary people, stories that people wouldn't consider they don't consider themselves to have been extraordinary, but are very much representative of the Irish experience around the world. And of the 330 stories in the museum, about 70 are living people. So they aren't all historic, and they've often come in themselves, which is a nerve-wracking moment when you're in charge of the content of the museum, to make sure that they're happy with how they're presented. You know, is the photo of them flattering enough? Is it accurate in terms of their experiences? And because, you know, their achievements haven't ended, they're still making history in their own way up to today. They need to be refreshed and brought up to date. So that's always I think it's a challenge, but it's also one of the best things about a museum like this is the chance to talk directly to people, get their story, get it firsthand, to show them how they're presented. And most people that have come in have been they're immensely proud to see themselves in the exhibition. They come in, they get photos, they bring family, bring friends, you know, they offer to give us hundreds more different photographs and scans of documents that they have and different things, which is fantastic. And I think we really enjoy that.
I think one of the most nerve-wracking moments I've had in the Little Museum was explain or telling Carmen Sita Hederman about Carmen Sita Hederman's time as Lord Mayor. That was a particularly strange and surreal moment a couple of years back. But one thing that you mentioned there that it had never crossed my mind to talk about, because I guess I assumed otherwise, but do you guys have an archival remit within EPIC? Is archiving a key part of your work?
So what we do is we don't ourselves, but we do actively collect all the different stories, and we work with different partners on that. So we don't necessarily study them ourselves, but we work with partners like the Europeana Network. If we're doing a lot of our story collecting projects would be themed, and we would work with them on different campaigns to gather new material. Actually, for an upcoming project, we're working with the National Museum on their LGBT Living History Archive. For a temporary exhibition that's currently being developed. So all of the stories and interviews that we conduct as part of that are going to be stored there. So we're quite excited about that. But we've also worked with the Digital Project of Ireland as well, who are a partner on a project we're doing around Ireland's sporting history at the moment. So where necessary, we always bring in an external partner on it. We gather stories as part of our kind of core remit anyway. But in terms of their preservation and safeguarding them for the future, we always make sure to bring somebody else in that has an expertise in that area, so that we know it will be safe and it will be secure.
That's a wonderful way of approaching it. And it's kind of, because when you were talking about collecting letters, just the curiosity in the back of my mind was going off as to, how you're simultaneously holding down an archive, which is of itself kind of a full-time kind of organization. But
we would love to, and then maybe down the line, but I think most museums, space is the biggest issue. And the more storage is never enough when you're running any museum anywhere in the world.
We would resemble that remark. We live up to the little museum of title in that regard. I think you touched on this idea that you're working on an exhibition or a project around the sporting history. And I know one thing that we were chatting about a few days ago was events like Riverdance at the Eurovision, or even the Italia 90, which we have an exhibition on at the moment, and how moments like this can be really key opportunities to kind of visibly put Ireland on the international stage.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think these key moments, actually, we have the very first gallery in our influence section is basically kind of a collage of key moments that brought the Irish people both at home and abroad closer together. So things like Ireland's first win at the Eurovision, when Dana managed to win it for us, and then the number of subsequent wins, Italia 90 as well, as a kind of a key moment in the Irish psyche that almost changed, I think, how Irish people perceive themselves, which are often considered to just be how Ireland, in terms of the island of Ireland, perceived itself. But actually, the Irish diaspora was involved in all of these events as the people here. Like in the case of Riverdance, of course, that was an Irish American event, effectively, when they performed down the road from here at what is now the Tree Arena in 1994 during the halftime of the Eurovision. Both Gene Butler and Michael Flatley are the ones that brought that to bear, and without that diaspora involvement, we wouldn't have this. It changes how we perceive Irishness, and I guess in a way our evolving sense of identity is something that Irish people are very good at responding to. It isn't something that's quite static. We didn't consider ourselves amazing at football. Our first World Cup, Italia 90, of course, which you can see the exhibition over at the museum, really, I think, brought Irish people to a world stage, and the Irish fans today are still considered among the best in the world at any tournament that we make it into. Even receiving their awards at the Euros in France. So that's fascinating. That Irish mentality and how it's changed. And I think with things like Riverdance, it's never stopped since '94. It's been touring the world. It's become an international phenomena. One of the key things people think of when they think of Ireland, or one of the most popular forms of Irishness and Irish culture expressed around the world. People know Riverdance. They often know you too. And I think Irish people are very proud of Italia 90. You need to communicate it to other visitors coming to our museum anyway, because we have some footage of it too, about why it was such a seminal event for us as well. But I think, that's some of the things that make us kind of uniquely Irish. And
I remember the first time I visited EPIC, it was probably in around the weeks that it first opened. Myself and a couple of our colleagues went over. You guys very kindly hosted us. And I remember walking into a room and you felt the heartbeat thumping of the opening the opening notes in the Riverdance moment, and it was one of those moments that you're just kind of going, this is absolutely such a key marker of our identity, and it's something that it's funny, it's one of the standout memories that I have. It was kind of it was a lovely first impression of the museum. But like, when you're talking about this huge number of projects that you guys are working on at the moment, and I know from my own perspective, I find it really exciting and inspiring to hear what you guys are up to. And you were saying that it's recently been set up, if I'm remembering this correctly, that there's a new network of immigration museums and kind of networks overseas that are all coming together. What's going on there?
Yeah, so I guess quite fortuitously, last October, so not too long ago, we're just coming up to about a year now, all of the world's immigration, migration museums, or any museums with a core remit around migration, were invited to meet in Antwerp, in Belgium, which was convened by the International Sites of Conscience and the Tenement Museum in New York. Because strangely, we'd never all been in one room before, which seems like just such a common sense thing to do. We were all sharing, we've so much in common. We were all brought together for a workshop for a couple of days just to let each other know what we were doing and how we might work together. So from that very overdue meeting, the network was formed, and we've started to collaborate on projects since then. So the first one we really would have been involved in was International Migrant Day on the 18th of December last year. Each of the different member institutions all over the world, so from Argentina to New Zealand to Australia, Canada, Germany, Poland, Ireland, Sierra Leone, and many other places, Pakistan, we've all come together and we've tried to find ways that we can work together. So we recognize that migration is just part of human history, always has been. Social mobility, people moving from place to place, has never not been part of world history, and never probably will cease to be. And we find that it's a really important message to get out there as well, that, you know, Irish experiences around the world are often have a lot in common with the experiences of people from Poland or people from Pakistan or elsewhere, and that we need to kind of work together a little bit more to highlight the common traits that our migrants have had, and to find ways to work together as well. So with International Migrant Day, what we did is we highlighted all of the events taking place at different museums all over the world. We also found out that we have a lot of stories in common as well. So while we tell the story of people leaving Ireland and their experiences overseas, some of our partner museums around the world, like the Migration Museum in Adelaide, for example, we found out that 2 of the stories featured here in Epic are also told there, but from the perspective of somebody who had just arrived. And we hadn't even been aware of it up until that point, which will tell you, you know, challenges of time zones apart, that there was so much scope for collaboration. And so we've started to work together then since December. We've been collaborating earlier this year as well around World Refugee Day. And then we're meeting again soon to plan to set up a kind of a global youth council where all the different migration museums can invite younger members who work with them, or members who take part in their education programs, or youth advisory groups, to have a giant kind of online Zoom meeting where they'll have a chance to meet each other, ask each other questions, learn about what it's like living in Buenos Aires, or living in Lahore, or living here in Dublin, and then how they might want to work together. So what have they got in common? What would they like to do? Would they like to collaborate on a project that the network can support? Could be an exhibition, could be a new program. We'll see what comes out of it. But I think now more than ever, collaboration is so important. And with everybody stuck almost in their own countries, unable to travel for one of the first times in history, building those connections and maintaining them is more important than ever. And for us, we found it's brilliant because the Irish diaspora, people who would hopefully get the opportunity to visit the museum, but a lot of people wouldn't. And the programs that we're starting up at the minute and that we've launched recently give them the opportunity to still take part in events here without ever having to leave their own homes, but they can still connect with Ireland and connect with the museum, which we consider really important.
I think that's an amazing thing that's come from the pandemic, because it is, as you said yourself, the idea that a museum halfway around the world is telling the next chapter in the story of someone's life who you've already spoken about here in Dublin, and to be able to put the kind of connect the dots and to bring those narratives together. And is, I guess, time is always the enemy in that, but the fact that, as you said, we're being brought into an online world. It's changing the way we communicate. And am I right in thinking that in Epic you yourselves have actually started to develop a digital program as well, and that you have a number of kind of themes that you're dealing with at the moment?
Yeah, so actually quite fortuitously, next week we're launching our new online lecture series. It's called Hidden Histories of the Irish Abroad. So the first talk will be next Thursday. And it looks at stories that people mightn't be familiar with. So while we do know quite a lot and people may be familiar with the Irish experience in the United States or in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and so on, other parts of the world, it's not as well known that there's still a significant Irish population there. Irish immigrants have been going there for centuries, and there's lots of interesting stories. So the first one we're launching is called The Irish in the Ussr. So it looks at Irish immigrants in the Soviet Union from the October Revolution all the way up to the collapse of the USSR in the early 90s. So there's a number of interesting stories, including a granddaughter of Daniel O'Connell who emigrated to the USSR. Which is quite fascinating. Other stories we're looking at are ones that mightn't be as well known. So the experience of Irish travellers abroad is the Irish traveller communities overseas. And we're looking at Irish involvement in slavery and anti-slavery movements, in Irish nationalism and Black nationalism as well. And then collaborations and links between Irish communities and mixed race communities. We're looking at the Irish behind bars. So Irish people in prisons around the world, what their experiences were historically, more recently, so from Soviet gulags all the way up to the penal convicts sent to Australia, for example, and all the way up to the present day. So we're trying to really broaden the remit and bring in stories that people wouldn't have been familiar with, haven't heard of, but to broaden their understanding of what it is to be Irish and where people went and what happened to them when they went there as well. So that's and that lecture is free, and the entire series will be as well. So please do come along if anyone's interested. And we will be also launching a number of other ones quite soon. We have a film screening on the experiences of Irish missionaries in South Africa, which we're doing with Lily's Leaf Farm, which is a museum which would have formerly been the underground headquarters of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And that will be on the 24th of September. We're doing a documentary screening, the world premiere actually, of the Irish missionaries' involvement in that movement. So that's something we're looking forward to. And one of the joys of it is that we're being able to invite an audience from South Africa and from Ireland simultaneously to a live event, which we could never have done before. And we'll have the opportunity for them to participate. So these events are all taking place as part of the Dublin Festival of History at the moment as well. So we're really excited about it, and we look forward to getting the different perspectives from the two audiences at the same event. So it's really exciting.
That's fascinating, and it's exciting because it kind of shows what the future of kind of events of this sort may look like, that we won't be kind of restricted to, I guess, in-person events. And actually on that note, I saw someone ask there a moment ago, just in terms of the makeup for yourselves, what proportion of the visitors that come to Epic are Irish residents versus people who are travelling to Ireland from overseas? Obviously at the moment, you're
yes, so well at the moment it's about 99% Irish people, and the other 1% are people who are resident here from other countries. But ordinarily it would vary throughout the year. So obviously in the middle of summer we would welcome a lot more overseas visitors to visit the museum. It would probably be about 60% international in the summer. So we actually do still get quite a lot of Irish people coming to the museum. Obviously schools are a big part of that as well. But in the quieter months around now and leading into winter, it would invert. We would see probably the majority of people coming from Ireland. At the minute, I think we're welcoming about 75% of people from Dublin to the museum, which is we're quite happy with. In terms of the programming, like our lectures and events and different things that we would host, workshops and so on throughout the year, are largely an Irish audience. So we would actually find that most of the people that would come to different talks that we'd have or different workshops would be from the Dublin area or from across Ireland. So it kind of depends on how they're engaging with the museum. And then online, we welcome it's everybody, people from all over. So really depends when you ask the question, but yeah, it's always changing.
That's totally fair. And I'm going to ask you an entirely mean question, which you can likely change the subject if you want. I think when you're curating an exhibition or when you run a museum and you're working in a museum, it's you're not technically, I don't believe, meant to have favorite items or favorite stories or favorite characters. So who's not your favorite story or person that you depict within Epic?
Not my favorite. So one well, of course you've no favorites. All stories and everybody featured is equally important at the museum.
So what's
But
not?
yeah, but what isn't? I don't know. It's difficult to say. So I guess there's one of the objects, and like there aren't too many on display downstairs. But one of them that actually I must say I do love it. So we'll see. It's a tiny little coin that's on display in our State and Society Gallery. It's an old British threepence piece, and it has engraved on it the name Paddy. It's quite beautiful actually, and there's a small little hole on the top. So it's what's actually known as a love token or a convict token, which was an interesting phenomena. So people being sent overseas to Australia, or in particular, but obviously very, very unlikely that they'd ever return. And while they were in prison here, they would like to leave a memento behind for their loved ones. So it could be their partner, it could be their girlfriend, their wife, their husband, or whatever it might be. And they would carve these little coins, often using a pinprick and like a flame underneath to soften the metal. And the one the one we have is quite ordinary, like it just says Paddy. But some of them they would write entire little poems, little messages and so on them, and they'd give them to their partner, and it'd be the last thing they'd probably have of them, because often, even when people finish their sentences, they couldn't afford to come back, or they'd lose track of them as they move around the country. So we don't know the entire story of this particular coin, but we do know that it would have been worn either as a bracelet or a necklace. Hence the small hole in the top. So you can imagine how poignant it would have been whenever somebody would have looked at it. There's a huge collection of them in the New South Wales Library in Australia, nearly 400, and there's some amazing examples there. But I think it's a lovely little tradition that I suppose kind of disappeared, but it's quite a poignant part of our story, I guess.
That's really beautiful. I will make a point to go and pursue it and to see Paddy's inscription next time I visit yourselves. It's lovely actually. The comments coming in this evening have been largely people kind of commenting on their own kind of personal connections to Ireland. Say we have, for example, we have a lady here who she lives in the UK, but her mum would have emigrated. I'm just trying to find the note here. Who's the daughter of an Irish immigrant and hoping to come back to Dublin again as soon as possible. And that's Margaret, who's in London, which I think we all collectively look forward to the day that we can welcome her back. It's
can't wait to welcome you, Margaret.
Very much so. And then I got another message here a second ago from Ava in Toronto. So even as we're speaking this evening, you're getting more stories to be kind of potentially incorporating into the works there in Epic. Then her great grandfather Michael Patrick Dunn came from County Wicklow to Canada around 1860, and her aunt Elizabeth Dunn was the first woman auditor for the government in Canada. Fascinating. So it's lovely to see even on this call that people have stories to be shared.
Yeah. And we welcome all those stories. Actually, there's a tab on our website where you can submit your own story, if anybody wants to visit and share with us, because they'll come in directly then to the museum, and we'll be able to save them for potential use in future, and just to keep them protected. So if you do want to use them, they may even eventually end up as part of our education program or even in the museum. We welcome them all. So please do share if you don't have the opportunity to come and visit the museum, or if you'd even like to, as we mentioned earlier, with the power of a name, if you'd like to share their story as part of that project, that's also welcome too. And maybe when you do get the chance to be able to see your surname on display when you do get to the museum. So it's epicchq.com if you want to share your story with us, because I'd love to hear them all.
Nathan, that's brilliant. I'm glad that people know where to go to give their stories and to get. And I'd imagine that more information on all of the programs that we've chatted about this evening would be on the CHQ website as well.
Yes, no, absolutely. So everything you might need about upcoming events, stories that we've written about some of the immigrants featured in the museum, education workshops, anything at all, tickets to the museum, whatever it might be. We also have an on-site partner, the Irish Family History Centre, who specialise in genealogy research. So if you're looking to find out more about your own family history, or you just want to conduct a little research project of your own, they're excellent as well. So I'd recommend you can get in touch with them, and if you do get a chance to visit, you can walk in and do a one-on-one consultation too. So there's loads of material online after you visit the little museum again, of course.
You're very kind. Yeah, my own father has used the genealogy services with yourselves, which was really useful and a wonderful resource to have available in the city. But amazingly, our hour is up. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been absolutely beautiful, Nathan. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your stories. I know I'm not the only one with a reignited want to go back and visit yourself and your colleagues over in Epic. So I guess for this evening, that's really been it. So Nathan, thank you so very much. And to everyone who's been here, thank you for joining us for another 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. So Nathan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to welcome all of you to the museum, and any stories you want to share, please do. We'd love to hear them. So it's been a pleasure talking to you all.
Super. Well, we'll see you all next week. So good night.
Night.